Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for listening in. Welcome to Switched On. If it's the first time you've ever been here, make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel. And I'll do an intro of who we got on today. And I'm delighted to welcome this chap. So I'll give a rundown of him. And he was a sleeper agent for the KGB. He spied on the USA between 78 and 88. He was an IT specialist. He's now turned author. And that is Jack Barsky. How you doing, Jack?
I'm all right. How are you? Glad to speak to somebody who introduces me as a chap.
Well, that's how we do it in the UK. Well, we try and be posh anyway. I always find that you're an American citizen now. They have a perception of us that we're really sort of posh chaps, and we're really not.
No, you are so much smarter than Americans because you speak so elegantly. So anytime somebody comes across with a British accent, we all say, "Whoa, we're not going to."
Oh, if only you knew! If only you knew the real British. But yeah. Anyway, Jack, thank you so much for coming on today. Now I've been researching, trying to get people involved in sort of espionage, the Soviet Union. Russia and things like that. It's virtually non-existent for obvious reasons. It's very rare to be able to speak to anyone like yourself that actually has a book about it and about his life and actually getting involved with the KGB. And yeah, I would just like to just touch on how it all started, really, because I know you was brought up in East Germany,
Yes,
and you were then. I'll just let you go with it. You know, you were brought up in East Germany, and then I want to get into your sort of life and how it brought up, and then how you were procured into the KGB itself.
yeah. I was born 4 years after the end of World War II in a small village in the eastern part of what was then the Soviet-occupied zone, which turned into the GDR, East Germany. It was a miserable time. I don't remember much of it because the first 6 years I have very few memories, but that's based on what my parents told me. It basically was, you were struggling to take care of the fundamentals, which is food, clothing, shelter. I did get even in that village, and later on we moved to a small city. I did get a halfway decent education. Then I was good enough to go to a gymnasium-like school. And after 12 years, I moved on to university and studied chemistry. And at that time, in my first year at college, I was recruited to join the Communist Party, which I readily did because I was already fully indoctrinated, knowing that communism was going to conquer the world, and I just wanted to be part of that. So in my third year, I was approached by the KGB. Got to tell you that you could not apply. Nobody could apply to serve with the KGB. They would recruit you. It's not like for instance, if you want to join the CIA, you can actually
apply,
ask them. Yeah, the KGB didn't operate like that, and I don't know about the Stasi, East German Secret Service. I think they also recruited you, and they recruited lots of them. So again, I was 21 years old when I was first approached by the KGB. It took about a year and a half of very informal contacts with the person who I was working with until they finally actually asked a question as to whether I was ready to join them full time and leave what I already had at the time, a full-time job as an assistant professor at the university. That was one of my 2 or 3 gut-wrenching, life-changing decisions I had to make that eventually those decisions got me here and got me to talk to you.
Yeah, well, it's amazing, and picking up on what you said about the communism being indoctrinated in that, and it just felt like a normality. You just wanted to be a part of it. So Yeah, so you were procured into the KGB. You've obviously accepted that, and then by that time, was you working in there for quite a substantial amount of time before they said, right, we're going to put you, we're going to send you to America? What was happening in between that time?
And from pretty much day one, or maybe the second meeting I had with the fellow that I worked with initially while I was still at university, it was clear that they wanted me for secret work in enemy territory. And I was initially prepared to go to West Germany. It wasn't even explicitly stated, but when you get as your first piece of literature to read, I got two things when I started full time. They gave me the big, thick book about the history of the Soviet Communist Party, and then the West German Constitution. So, I was, and that makes sense, right? You're German, you'd speak German without an accent. I mean, it's so easy to smuggle you into that country and do well. In hindsight, you wonder why the Russians wanted their own man or their own people in West Germany when the Stasi had about 1,000 illegal agents. Well, some of them very well placed in the government. But that tells you that they didn't really trust each other.
And the Stasi was the West German Secret Service, was it, Jack?
Right, that's correct.
Yeah.
So, and as part of my training, I was required to learn a foreign language and learn it well. And they gave me a choice. And since in high school I learned English. I never studied it. It was so easy to me. So I said English, and so I started learning English again from scratch, and I threw myself into this like I've always done in my entire life. I do something, I do it with a vengeance. And so within 9 months, I was fluent. Maybe not actively fluent, but I was able to read English novels without having to look into a dictionary.
Wow.
And so one day, I got this training in Berlin, East Berlin. One day we got a visitor from Moscow, and he asked me, "So how's your English going?" And I pulled a book out and said, "Well, I can read this, no problem." He said, "Huh?" And then a light bulb went up, and says, "Okay, we're going to give you a tape recorder, and why don't you just tape something, talk about whatever you want to do, read something." I did that, and within a week, Moscow notified me that they wanted me there to be evaluated. So I went on a plane for the first time in my life and met in Moscow an English teacher, a Russian person who spoke English with the British English, the Queen's English, and an American. And so I spoke with them for a couple of hours, and after that they went back and discussed whether, and the question was, and I didn't know it then, but I found out later, the question was, can this man get rid of his German accent to a point where he could credibly pretend to have been born in the United States? And so the answer was a tie. The Russian says no. The American says, I think he can. And so wishful thinking took over, and the decision maker said, "Okay, you're going to come to Moscow, and you will work with this lady as a tutor, and we'll do the best you can to get rid of that accent." I'm still not 100% accent free, but 95% is good enough, particularly when you live in New York, which is where I operated, and when your birth certificate says that your mother's name was Schwartz, which is a German name. So I could, and that was never a problem. Anybody who mentioned that, you have a bit of an accent. I said, yeah, sure. I grew up bilingual. That was the end of that.
Then that was the end of the subject, and it was just forgotten.
Oh yeah, nobody questioned that, and most people wouldn't even hear it. I hear it myself when I hear my own voice recorded. I can hear it, but I'm not being very careful as I used to be, because I can be myself. Everybody that I meet nowadays knows my background because I'm a very public figure.
Yeah. So, Jack, tell me. So, at that point, you're in Moscow, so they've decided to send you over to the States, and there's always this perception of espionage and spies and everything like that. It's sort of romantic, sort of James Bond, and people looking to that, you're going on to these missions. Is there a rundown in an itinerary to say, right, because your real name is Albrecht, isn't it? Is it Albrecht, to pronounce that correct?
Yes, sir.
Albrecht. And so they say, well, you're going to have this name, Jack Barsky. You're going to go into do this, that, and the other. And you just, with open arms, just said, yeah, okay, I'm going to just drop my life, because obviously you had to cut ties with your family, didn't you?
Yes.
What was that like?
Yes. Well, so when I left the city where I studied and worked as a university professor, it's the city of Jena in East Germany, I had to disengage from the job, from my friends that I had, and from my basketball team that was a special group, and then I had to also tell my mother and my brother where I was going and what I was doing. So initially I went to Berlin, and my story was, I'm going to be a member of the Foreign Service. What is that called in English?
Yeah, MI6.
The State Department.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
I'm going to be a member of the State Department. I'm going to be a diplomat.
Oh, okay, yes.
My mother was a little bit taken aback by that. You're going to change your career altogether. I said, but you see, I'll be able to travel. It's great. I'm going to be part of the government. Okay, that sank in because, as you probably know, Germans love traveling. And that's in our blood. There's a word in Germany, it's called Wanderlust, that means the joy of wandering around, for which there is no good translation in English. So 2 years, right? And then when I moved to Moscow, at that point, I had no more contact with my friends and my ex-colleagues. Only my mother and my brother had to be taken care of. My father was out of the picture. My parents were divorced. So now I had to tell them something else. And I told them, well, I'm going to be working as a science attaché in the East German embassy in Moscow. That did almost caused a problem, because one day my mother and her new husband showed up in Moscow to visit me.
Oh, no.
So we had to very quickly find a way to deflect any of their attention. We never let them go to obviously they couldn't read Russian. They had no idea how to get around in Moscow. So my handler and I were with them all the time. And when they asked me to see my apartment, I told them that it was being renovated, and I stayed in a hotel for a couple of days. That worked out okay, but then we had to find another backstory to prevent further visits once I'm in the United States. And that then moved me to Kazakhstan as a member of a fictitious organization called Intercosmos that was supposedly a joint effort of the Warsaw Pact states to do space exploration. And Kazakhstan was known to house that kind of facility, and it was super secret. You couldn't get anywhere near that. So that's how I removed myself from the scene. And it worked reasonably well, because many years later, when I reappeared in East Germany, I was told that friends of ex-classmates of mine all knew that I had perished in a rocket accident in Kazakhstan, and my mother was still looking for me until the end of her life. And she even wrote a letter to then President Gorbachev, asking him for help to find me, because I had no more contact. While I was still with the KGB, I communicated with pre-written letters. So she still had signs of life, and all of a sudden there was no more sign of life. I was gone. So that was one of the dark aspects of doing what I did.
Yeah, I mean, trying to handle that, I can imagine emotionally being, going to that next stage of your life, and that, well, it must have been, I mean, just imagine right now, this is really serious. I'm actually cutting off my family. So from that moment, you went to Kazakhstan, and then what was the transition from there?
Of course, I didn't go. This was fictitious.
Oh, that
right?
was fictitious. So the space program. So your family.
We moved myself.
So you were still in Moscow.
At the embassy to Kazakhstan. That means they couldn't visit anymore.
Oh, I see. But was you in America by this time, Jack, or were you still in Moscow?
No, this was coincidental with me going to the United States. At that point, I let my mother know I'm going back into science, and I'm joining this Intercosmos 99, I think it was called, and I had a forged document that appointed me as a research scientist there. In the meantime, I'm on my way to the United States.
So you're on your way to the United States. What is the information that KGB have given to you then as your what you need to undertake in order to gain information to give to them? What have they told you? Right, this is what we need you to do. We need you to go to the United States, because I know you worked as an IT professor or worked in IT when you were in the States. So what information were you gathering for them?
The tasks evolved. It was almost like, I don't know if you know the saying, that build it and they will come. Yeah. We'll send you there and you figure something out. I was prepared. I was focused supposedly on political intelligence. In other words, their idea was that I should be able to position myself in such a way that I would have contacts with foreign policy decision makers or influencers. But for the first 2 years, the focus was on becoming a bona fide American. See, what I had was a certified copy of a birth certificate in the name of Jack Barsky. Jack Barsky was a real person who passed away at the age of 10 or 11. And that was a typical modus operandi, how the KGB stole identities. They were looking around in graveyards to find gravestones that indicated there was a child that died early. And somehow security was really lax in those days in the US. One could acquire death certificates, birth certificates. And so I got one of those birth certificates. I was Jack Barsky. And with that, we developed a long cover story, because as per that birth certificate, I entered New York State at the ripe old age of 34. So I had to know what I was doing from birth to that age. And it was a 6-page story with all kinds of, addresses and pictures of schools and, stories about my father, who we killed off very early. And then my dropping out of high school, having migraine headaches, and just moving into the country and spending 12 years on a farm before reappearing in New York. I never really had to tell the entire story, only bits and pieces of it. But you got to have something like that. If you don't have it, you'll be scared, because somebody asks you can't just make things up. Anyway, so this is what I had, and I needed I had the birth certificate, and I had to acquire two documents, critical documents to live and work in the United States: a driver's license and a social security card. That worked really well. And then the crown jewel was supposed to be a passport. And because the plan was that once I'm an American with a passport, I would move to, we didn't specifically say which country, it could have been Austria or Switzerland, not West Germany, and open a company, and the KGB would have funneled a bunch of money into that company. And within a couple of years, I'd go back to the United States with maybe 10 million in tow, and wouldn't have to tell anybody how I made the money, because I had a business in Switzerland. And with that kind of money, I would have been able to join a country club, get to know people at the upper echelons of society. I think the plan was brilliant. The execution stunk. And it was partially, we practiced filling out this application, a passport application in Moscow. We talked about it, and I didn't think it through. I made a couple of mistakes. I was working at the time as a messenger. So there was a question, what's your profession? And I wrote messenger. Well, messengers made minimum wage. And then there were two optional answers. When do you plan to travel, and where are you going? I left those blank. So now this is so stupid. So here's a messenger who makes no money. He doesn't know where he's going. He doesn't know when, and he wants a passport. So the clerk who looked at this application said one of the worst sentences I ever heard in my life, when he said, we have some questions about your identity. Why don't you fill out this additional questionnaire? Well, that questionnaire, the first question that they asked was, where did you go to high school? At that point, I knew I was busted. I managed to grab my application and the documents that were still sitting in front of the clerk, and just walk out of there, expecting somebody to follow me. I got lucky. But that was the end of the dream of becoming rich and living sort of a James Bond-like life.
Yeah. And I can imagine you had paranoia all the time, did you, when you was in America, being obviously working for the KGB?
No, I want to interrupt you. There's a song that goes like, paranoia will destroy you. You cannot live in fear. So I am by nature highly risk tolerant. As a child, I did things that you shouldn't do, and I got a lot of injuries. I just like very daring to a point of almost being reckless. So it wasn't that hard not to be afraid. Concerned you are, but you can't constantly look over your shoulder, because that is a dead giveaway, and you will fail. Fear will make you fail no matter what you do in life.
No, 100% agree. And obviously, it's not a normal life that you're undertaking. You have to be a certain way inclined to be able to do that, to go into a foreign land and obviously be like one of their own. It's not a normal process at all.
And what helped in that respect, I was extremely ambitious. I always wanted to be the best at everything I did. And so, that was my task now. This is what I was going to do, and this is what I hopefully was going to do as well as I could. If it hadn't been for that passport debacle, I would have become a rather dangerous agent.
So you were established. You become established in America. Obviously, you settled down, and I read that obviously you were liaising with the KGB via radio transmission. What information? First question: what information did you manage to get out? Actual useful information to the KGB, and what was the process of the communications?
Well, let me start with the communication first.
Okay.
it was very awkward. I received instructions through shortwave radio that was double encrypted, and once a week on a Thursday at 9:15, I would dial into my frequency and write down the digits. This were nothing but digits, and then decipher the stuff. On average, it would take about an hour and a half to get a half a page of typewritten kind of information. Sometimes it was a lot longer. So you can see that you can't get a lot of detail that way. It got even worse for me to send information to Moscow. I used secret writing, wrote regular letters. I was limited to 2 pages, and I wrote an open text to somebody who I didn't know, but I pretended to have known. I wrote as if we were friends, and then put secret writing on top of it. That would then go via airmail to a European country where a collaborator notified a resident KGB agent who would take that letter, put it in the diplomatic pouch, and then send it to Moscow where it was developed. So the communication cycle, like when you watch movies or TV about espionage, there's always these meetings where the handler meets with the agent face to face, and they go back and forth. When it took 3 weeks if I had a question to get an answer, so that was awkward. Rarely, because that was a little more dangerous, but rarely when I had a lot of stuff to transmit, I actually did something else. I photographed 10, 15, 20 pages of paper that I had written on, and then and then photographed the stuff and put the undeveloped cartridge in a container. I can show you one.
Brilliant.
I used like these kinds of things. This is a rock made out of plaster of Paris. This rock actually contains a key, and so we would conduct what's called a dead drop operation, where my counterpart would know to look for a rock at a certain time in a certain place. So that was all the communication that we had.
Wow.
So I was pretty much on my own, and what they asked me to do was, number one, gather political information, even if you don't get close to decision makers. But we want to know what does the American public think about stuff, unfiltered, not read from the press, but the people that you're talking with. So I periodically, sent a report like that. And what was probably the most valuable information was I operated as a talent spotter. So in other words, every person that I met, I would profile and send the profile to Moscow with the idea as to whether they might be valuable recruits one of those days. And I think particularly the students, I went back to college in New York, the students that I met there and profiled could have been pretty good targets because, I was in a business school, so there were a lot of economics majors, and some people with rather radical left-wing or right-wing ideologies. Those were the most likely the juiciest targets for recruitment.
Wow. Sorry, Jack, carry on.
We focused on ideology, not money, and not bribery, and not blackmail, because a bribed agent or a blackmail agent can turn. Somebody who has a strong ideology sticks with you for sometimes forever.
Mm.
And but I was never told what the value was of what I gave them. They said, well, more contacts, and other than that, the last, I went back to Moscow for debriefing and some vacationing every 2 years. The last time I was in Moscow was 1986, where I was introduced to somebody from a different department, and that was technical espionage. And this guy was very honest with me. He said, we are hurting. We are falling behind, particularly in information technology. You are in information technology. Whatever you can get your hands on that we can't buy in the market, we would be glad to take. Well, because of the problems with buying hardware and then handing it over to a Russian, the diplomats could have done that too. Whatever you buy in the store, they could buy that too. So that was not an option. But I had access to source code, rather top of the line source code, and I managed to copy one of the most popular business software piece around that's actually still being used today to run organizations and companies. Whether they could use it or not, I doubt it. Knowing what I know now about information technology, if you want to automate a process, you have to have the process. And I'm not sure that the the Soviet economic model could imitate the same process that this software was actually automating. Wow. So the question I always get, so what did you actually give the Russians and how valuable was it? And I can't give us a clear answer because I was never given any feedback. And my honest answer is typically not much, but I've been corrected by people in counterintelligence. They said you don't know. There could be a spy running around that you actually profiled. You don't know.
It sounds, they're protecting their own interests at the same time, compartmentalizing everything, don't they? So they don't let you know what information they get back. They're probably getting a lot from it. Yeah.
The KGB was excellent when it came to guarding the secrets. I knew just as much as I needed to know to do my work. So when I eventually started working with the FBI, I could not give them any names. I didn't have any. The only names that I did have were like code names. Like I had one, and anytime a Soviet KGB agent introduced himself, excuse me, I knew that wasn't his name. And I introduced myself with Dita, that wasn't my name either. So yeah, they were very good at it, which unfortunately, the CIA particularly does not do well at all. That organization leaks like a sieve.
Wow. Yeah. Well, throughout history, you can look into that and see that's true. So by this time, Jack, obviously you relay information. You've settled down, and you began to start your own family in the States as well, didn't you?
Yeah.
So what was that like? So you
can't, I was in my 30s, and I'm a biological normal human being. So, and it's as part of fitting in society. You got to have a girl, right?
Yeah, of course.
And I had a girl, and it turned out that this girl, she was from Guyana, South America. And I didn't know this initially. She was in the country illegally. And this is how, I cannot say what her motive was because she never told me, but I know how folks from third world countries, ladies, often operate. They come here, stay here, find themselves a man, get married, and become citizens. So it happened with me. She was very nice. She was sweet. She was pretty. And when she opened up to me that she was illegal, I said, "Oh my God!" And I did some investigations, and I figured I have enough documentation. I have a good job. I think I can. We get married, and we make it legal, and then we get divorced. Well, I didn't figure that there would be a second step. All of a sudden, she was pregnant.
Ah,
That, of course, changed the equation initially, because I knew I was going to go back. So I knew I was going to have to leave her. So I kept my distance. I situated her in an apartment. I took care of her and the baby. I, I took her to the doctor, took both of them to the doctor, gave her food, bought the food and all that. But it became too much. I couldn't handle financially uh, the two places, and it was awkward.
mm.
So eventually I found a place where we both could live together, and I had a special room where I could do my secret work without being disturbed.
She didn't know about your work, though, Jack, did she? Did she know about your work? Did she know about your
No,
work?
no. Oh, no, not until many, many years later. And but what happened was I'm now experiencing the love of a parent because I see this little girl grow up, and as she was able to start to communicate with her eyes, I absolutely fell in love with her, and that changed my life again.
And is that where you started to think that questioning everything, what I'm going to do, where am I going to go with this, and is this sustainable?
I was now wondering how do I take care of this child? I was still I was still convinced that I one day would have to go back to where I came from, but I couldn't find a way to remotely take care of this girl. But then my hand was forced. The KGB forced my hand because one day they uh, called me home in an emergency. It was they thought, I don't know what the reason might be. The FBI couldn't have figured this one, couldn't figure this one out. They thought, and I was under investigation and I was about to be arrested. So they came up with this emergency, come home right away, no questions asked, just get on a plane and fly to, we had a pre-planned emergency route. And now they forced my hand. I was not prepared to leave. I didn't want to leave this girl by herself. And I went back and forth, and it was a tight decision. I call it 51 to 49. The 51 was the girl's smile. She won. So I decided to stay. I decided to disobey the order, and I let the KGB know the reason that I'm not coming is that I have contracted HIV/AIDS, and the only country where I could possibly get treatment is the United States. They believed it. I didn't know at the time. I was hoping they would. But I know that they did because many years later, when I had contact with my family, my German family, they told me that there was an agent that informed them that I had already died from AIDS. And that was case closed.
So there you had your answer. But Jack, I want to rewind on that because I've obviously been reading a hell of a lot about you. I've got your book as well. I got it delivered yesterday. I haven't managed to read it all. But about the signal that the KGB give you about the paint.
We had a signal system, and the KGB knew the route that I took every morning to go to work, and I gave them a spot where they could put graphic signals. So every morning I just walk by there and see something like this. The signals had very simple meanings, such as come to a dead drop operation. That one, it was already prearranged, but it was then supposed to take place the following Saturday. Or listen to the radio every day. Some, things like that. Very simple. And I made them into dots with different color, sort of the size of a fist, so they wouldn't be overlooked and couldn't be washed away. We didn't use chalk in that particular situation, couldn't be washed away by the rain. So fist size signals, and the most important one was the danger sign. And the danger sign was a red dot. It says, "Get out of here, go get your reserve documents." I had reserve documents that I hid someplace in a park in New York, and get out of the country. No explanation given. Now, then I was supposed to also confirm that I received that signal at another spot. Since I didn't do that, I waited until, this was maybe a Monday, I waited till Thursday to listen to the radio transmission, and that's where they explained, "We have reason to believe that your cover is about to be blown. Get out." So I kicked the can down the road. I was stalling because there were a number of reasons why I couldn't have heard that radio transmission. I could be sick. I could be in a hospital. The radio was broken. A number of ways that would have made it impossible for me to get that information. So after 3 weeks, they figured they needed to really know what's going on. And that's when they sent one of the guys, one of their diplomats, who knew to wait for me on my way to work. And I went into the subway station, and he came after me, and he snuck up to me and said those words that I also will not ever forget. He said, "You got to come home, or else you're dead."
Wow.
Now, you can interpret this one way or the other. The most negative interpretation is always a possibility with the KGB. I believe he probably, not knowing English very well, he probably used bad language. "You're dead, you're busted." He could have said something that didn't indicate that I might actually get killed. But you have to take it seriously, because I knew then that the KGB had a habit of going after defectors.
That's just unbelievable. I can't imagine what that must feel like. But yeah, I mean, the KGB has a history of it, obviously. So you've got that nudge, let's just call it, to say you need to go back, or we're going to kill you, basically. And then you've just held out, and then you told them about the HIV, and they've just let it go.
And I knew that they let it go. They transmitted shortwave every day, and one day the transmission stopped. That means they got my letter in secret writing. They read it, and they said, "Okay, he's done. He's going to die."
So by that time, you've settled down. You tried to live a normal life, and then when did this happen that you started to speak with the FBI?
Yeah, I settled down. A year later, I bought a house in the suburbs, moved in with the mother of the child, and we decided to have another child. So I knew I would never, ever see Germany again. I knew I would live the rest of my life in the United States. I did not want to contact U.S. authorities because I was afraid they might throw me in jail anyway. Excuse me. And I embarked on a pretty decent career. I very quickly got into management and worked my way up the ladder, made good money. At the time when the FBI introduced themselves, I had a nice house in the country in Pennsylvania. It was in 1997. It was 9 years after I quit the KGB that one day there was a toll gate that I had to drive through on my way home. There was the Delaware River, and you had to just stop there and put 50 cents and then you get through. And there was a policeman on the other side, and he told me to pull over, and because he said it was a routine traffic stop. Then he asked me to get out of the car. I I had no thought that this was anything bad. But then another fellow comes from the right, and before I could even think what's going on here, he flashed a badge. I didn't even have to look at the badge. I knew something was up, and he said, "FBI, we would like to talk to you." That was another one of those sentences I really didn't want to hear, but it turned out to be probably the best sentence I ever heard in my entire life, because it allowed me to eventually normalize and become get liberated from that secret that I was carrying deep down inside with me, that nobody knew, absolutely nobody. So at that point, I wasn't a communist anymore. I had embraced capitalism. I loved the way of life in the United States. So I had every reason to cooperate to the fullest. And I did. And so in return, they allowed me to, they didn't put me in jail. They eventually told me that there was a path to citizenship. 5 years ago, I did become a citizen. And, but I still, for many years, I still kept everything secret. The FBI knew, I knew, and my family knew, but nobody else. That changed eventually also, but I don't want to get too far ahead.
I was going to ask you, Jack, as also, how did you feel, obviously, with the KGB and the way they behaved? And then you look at Russia today, you look at Litvinenko in London, and many different cases, that even Navalny now, and the way that they've behaved with people that speak out against the state, doesn't matter how old it is. Do you always have that feeling? I know you said you don't live in fear, but the way that Russia do conduct themselves in regards to people like you, do you always have that fear?
Well, I have sort of two answers to this. The rational answer, and the FBI would agree with me, is that if there was a list that they have somewhere, a secret list of who they would want to do harm to, I would be at the very bottom for two reasons. I'm not Russian. I didn't betray the motherland.
Yeah.
That is the ultimate crime. This is when they went after the defectors. I wasn't Russian. I never had a rank and serial number. I was a contractor, right? And my case is very old. So if there were some individuals who thought I might have betrayed them personally, they're most likely not alive anymore because they were older than me. Does it mean I shouldn't be careful? Well, the one place I will not ever set foot in is Russia. That wouldn't make a lot of sense, right? Or even some of the neighboring, somewhat lawless states where accidents can easily be arranged just to give a message, just because you can. But an assassination is a very difficult thing to organize, and then they don't have that many people who can do that. So I think there's a hierarchy, and as I said, I'm pretty much near the bottom. That doesn't mean that I don't do weird things. So there's some residual fear in me, and I tell you why I know that. So I live in a neighborhood. I still run 4 or 5 miles, and there's a stretch of forest that I run through. And every time there's a car parked there, I'm thinking, there's no reason. What's the car doing there? And I start running zigzag or speed up and slow down. Can't help myself.
Not surprised. I'd be exactly the same, Jack. It's good that you are running as well, where it keeps you fit. I mean, and you London as experience. Well, the Litvinenko saga. I mean, that was, and then obviously the Novichok in Salisbury. What are your overall thoughts on Russia and the way they are today? I mean, and the Communist Party.
Well, it's an oligarchy, as you know, and the Russian, I call this a national DNA, is fundamentally, I believe, quite happy with having a strong man, a perceived strong man, and strong leadership at the top. You know, when you look at the history of Russia as it was born around in the Middle Ages, it was constantly under attack from the north, the east, the west, and the south. Uh, so Russia has this bunker mentality. The Soviet Union had it too, and I don't really believe that Russia wants to conquer the world. Maybe the Soviet Union, yes, but Russia, they're worried about their security. It's not like China. I would be more worried about China. We need to, America needs to be sure that need to have a really decent line of communication and not constantly blaming Russia for everything that's going wrong in this country, simply because they have 50% of the nuclear arsenal. And quite frankly, when people ask me what am I afraid about, Russia, if that state falls apart, those nuclear weapons aren't protected. So there's some interest in having a stable government there. You know, for us to try to undermine the Russian government I don't think it would be a great idea. Now, that's my opinion, and I don't make policy. Lately, in the last several years, it has been very fashionable, both by the Democrats and the Republicans, to just like badmouth Russia. Yeah, we don't like it, but it's their country, and we should be worried about the safety of the free world, the safety of the United States, and the world per se. Those weapons can blow up the earth many times over.
No, I completely agree. I mean, dealing with throughout Russia's history and looking especially now, and the espionage, and I brought up before about Litvinenko and the I can't remember the guy's name, but he was a defect as well, and they tried to poison him with Novichok. But
Skripal,
that's it. Yeah, and he's obviously he's in hiding now. Obviously, he can't show his identity. And they seem so brazen in the way that they behave, because they poisoned Navalny with Novichok as well, and he had to go to Germany to be treated, and then to him, he obviously come back. But the way I see it there now, it could potentially unfold into civil unrest, because anyone that obviously speaks out against the Putin, and again, I can't remember the guy's name before, who was assassinated in Moscow. It just seems that the Russian people, I mean, it seems in Western media, I will add, but it seems that the Russian people have had enough. And it does seem they are quite prominent still in being involved in our social media, especially, and China as well, and how they influence things.
There's a book that came out about 6 months ago called Russians Among Us. It's by Gordon Carrera. He writes about the illegals that were arrested in the United States in 2010, but he also goes into what's going on in Russian intelligence these days. They monkey around in social media quite well these days, and they use artificial intelligence to create identities, to create even messages, and making a big mess out of social media. I've heard estimates that possibly between 10 and 20% of what you find on Twitter and Facebook is manufactured by Russia.
Yeah, I could quite easily believe that.
That's what we call in the business, we call it active measures. The KGB did active measures way back when they planted false stories into newspapers, or maybe a radio show, something like that. And now this is so much easier with social media. And there's so many, I mean, fundamentally, that includes myself. We are all idiots when it comes to dealing with social media. I cannot state with confidence that I've never been fooled but I'm also not getting my information from social media. I stay away from that nonsense.
Yeah, because there's so much. I mean, the vast majority of social media is fake anyway, and especially the way you read news and algorithms and everything like that, they just seem to set it up of what you want to see. And I think that's why
Exactly.
we have such polarized opinions now in the UK and in America.
Exactly.
For that reason.
What that does, it firms nascent beliefs and makes them into belief systems. I have this happening in my family. I'm not going to mention who and how. I think we're dealing with successfully, but it's so easy to fall for a lie that confirms what you already know about the world. And then you add to that lie, you add to it, and eventually, what happened to me as a young person, you become a firm believer in communism. Even though one iota of critical thinking would have said, well, I got to take another look at this. And if I may, one of the mottos of communism is from each to his ability, to each according to his needs. All right, that sounds really good, but who determines what you need and what I can contribute? Aha. So there has to be some
State.
somebody above you, right? And me as an anti-authoritarian, I would have said, man, I don't like this. but I didn't think critically, because whatever was at us was hit fertile ground because there was already an existing belief system. And this is how manipulation in social media operates these days.
The motives
on the left and on the right.
Oh yeah, no, 100% agree with all what you just said. And obviously communist parties, that's why there are rooms for corruption, and they are distributed through society, but there's always an authoritarian state in power that is corrupt, but not all the time. But you look at China and Russia. What I was going to ask you is the motives. Now we as it's perceived to us in Western media, that the Russians are infiltrating that, and you confirm that it's part of a sort of try and divide the Western public. What would be the motive for Russia to do that, though? The same with China. You know, Russia seemed to be very much involved in the American election. They're even suggesting, I don't know whether that was true, but if it was, what would be the motive? And now, from your expertise, to try and disrupt the Western societies?
Well, let's just make one thing clear. I believe the CIA has meddled in more elections than the Russians have. So everybody does it. Let's not be, be morally superior to, oh, these are really bad people.
Yeah.
They try it because they can. But the motive in terms of the overall active measures is they're playing the distraction game. You know, as long as we are focused on each other, the Democrats and the Republicans constantly fighting with each other, we don't pay as much attention to like when they marched and took over Crimea. You know, we're not focused on some of the things that they think they can get away with and have gotten away with. Again, the focus, I think, of Russia is to create a buffer zone like they had in the Soviet Union with the Baltic states and Ukraine and in the south. So a buffer around the core of Russia, so that they're not vulnerable to invasion. I think that's sort of instinctive what they're trying to do. I don't believe that they ever want to march into Germany and take over Germany.
No, and you made a great point as well, because it's with our MI6 and MI5 as well, and obviously the CIA. I mean, they've armed rebels, and people have come out against them, and whistleblowers, and they're committed crimes just as much. It's just perceived that the Russians are the bad guys all the time, and I certainly believe there is substance to that. It's always perceived that they're the bad guys, we're the good guys. But
we are probably better guys. But we're using bad guy tools. And so now it becomes a moral dilemma. Is the old the thing about the goal, the end, and the means.
Mm.
Right? Does a noble end justify any means? And philosophers will argue that one until the cows come home, because I don't think there's a really good answer.
No, no. I mean, it's a very complex sort of to look at an overall perspective. And so, what are you doing now, Jack? Because I know you obviously have done speeches and stuff like that. Do you still give information talks about your work and what you've done and how you can help?
Well, to the extent I can right now, I'm limited to Zoom type meetings. I've given some lectures. I've given some lectures at university, high schools, and stuff like that. This is all pro bono. But the events where I could give a paid presentation or currently don't exist.
Mm-hmm.
But the biggest thing that I'm working on right now, besides I have a bunch of projects in the, believe it or not, in the entertainment industry that have nothing to do with my story. I discovered that I have a bit of a creative streak in me, so I'm writing some things. But the biggest thing I'm working on right now is a podcast / radio drama that's based on my book. It's going to be a 12-part series, 45 minutes each, where I speak, and then a whole lot of people that were important in my life, to the extent they're still around, will add their own view of. So when I wrote my book, I could only write it from my perspective. When you talk about when you let others who I had interaction with tell their story and how they saw me, that adds another dimension.
Yeah, different perspective.
It also, we can, for instance, talk about what my mother did and how she actively searched for me.
I read
Again,
that.
I could put that in my book. And lastly, the producer who's doing this is a history buff, so we're going to put a nice foundation of history below this, and it's going to be with music and dramatic and narration. It's going to be really good. It's going to come out sometime probably in May, and should be available to anybody on the planet via the internet. It's going to be the money is going to be made through ads, so you will be able to get to it without having to pay.
Right, brilliant. And that's the book, Deep Undercover.
The book is called Deep Undercover. The working title for very nice. The working title for the podcast is The Agent. I like it. We'd probably keep it that way, but I don't know that yet.
Excellent, Jack. And I am surprised that obviously they haven't made some sort of film about your life.
Yeah, I had a contract with a European company to make a series out of this, but unfortunately, the company was taken over by venture capital, and venture capital very often doesn't know anything about the business that they're taking over. They're just looking at the bottom line numbers, and they canceled the project. At that time, an American production company stepped in, and they were very happy to pick up the pieces. We have a contract that starts with a podcast, which we are doing, with the option of doing something afterwards, such as a miniseries or a movie. Obviously, it will depend how well the podcast does.
Right. Well,
right?
It's about. Sorry, Jack.
I have, and that's not bragging. It is what it is. I have not met a single person in person who wasn't crazy about the book. I've been told that it reads like a novel. It's a page turner. I had a good team to help me with this. Right, this isn't just you write this and then it's done. I had a helper, and then I had a really good editor who made it flow. Okay. But anyway, the story is so bizarre that you you can really make a good miniseries or movie out of it for sure. We'll see. There's a lot of stories that never make it onto the screen, and there's some that don't deserve. That the entertainment business is fickle and it's also very slow moving.
Well, never say never, Jack, because obviously your story is incredibly compelling. And as I say, I've grazed through your book because I only got it yesterday, but I'm going to look through it and read it, of course, and I look forward to that. But Jack, honestly, I'm going to wrap it up now because we're going to do a full hour. And I thank you so much for coming on. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on. And as I say, if you want to catch Jack, anyone that's watching, you can look him up on YouTube. And his 60-minute interviews and the documentaries that he's done. He's got a book.
I have a website too, but you just Google my name and you'll find several pages of it.
Fantastic. Jack Barsky, thank you very much indeed.
You're welcome.